This is Beyond a Reasonable Doubt with your hosts, Mark Geragos and Gary Smith.
Welcome to Beyond a Reasonable Doubt with obviously my favorite guest and longtime friend, Drew Pinsky. Drew, I wanted to talk to you about Lori Vallow and get your kind of impressions, especially now that you're dipping your toe back into expert work. She is a mother who they call her the doomsday mom because she was attracted to kind of this junior varsity cult, if you will, accused of killing her kids. There's a horrifying tape of her talking to her friend, pretending the kids are alive and safe when it appears from all the evidence that, in fact, they were already dead and buried. This case has taken a while to get to trial because she becomes incompetent at various stages. She's now on trial. The jury, when they listened to the tape I just referenced, people in the courtroom said that the jurors were horrified, you might imagine. This is and she does not want, Idaho's got kind of a peculiar mental health issue, but my experience, something that resonated with me is she did not want her lawyers to use a mental health defense. And right, she did not. She was cognizant, at least, of them, was able to at least presumably engage with the lawyers, but at some level said, I'm not crazy, I'm not going there, I don't endorse this. Okay. I've seen that over the years with clients who I think are out of touch with reality, or not.
Correct.
Two things. The question I wanted to ask you is, what is that phenomenon?
That's something called anosognosia. It's why the streets are full of homeless people outside your office. It's the same phenomenon. Serious mental illness is often accompanied by something called anosognosia. This dovetails into another topic, Mark, which is why we don't help these people when they have think about it, they have a brain condition that prevents them neurologically from perceiving what the illness is doing to them. It hijacks their thinking. It hijacks their motivational states to make them believe that the things they're doing are correct. So sometimes when someone insists on not being crazy, they are really crazy. I don't mean that's a pejorative term. We used to use it all the time. But the point is the mental illness might be even more severe than less severe. It's not as though she's coming to her senses. She may be more out of touch with reality.
So that's in all of this kind of, I'm doing my own little data points. All of this was triggered. Gary and I were talking about downtown LA, and that was what was interesting to me. And I said, when you walk around the downtown and you see these people, there's an anger. They're just so frustrated and they're screaming, and it's almost like they're trapped. And then as I was exiting on Friday, there was a guy who had actually come to security and had said, please call the paramedics. I feel like I'm becoming disassociative, or he didn't use that term, but I don't want to, I need a 5150 declared. So I assume that what you're talking about, and correct me if I'm wrong, is there's some kind of a continuum here that we're talking about.
There is a continuum. So some people, it kind of depends on the condition. Like if you remember people are very aware of what happened to Amanda Bynes. She has a delicate, looks like bipolar disorder, becomes manic, probably stops her meds. And then she goes out on the street and then takes her clothes off. And that's what manics do. And then go and had enough kind of self-presence to call the cops to go, I need help. You got to take me to the hospital. Because she'd been treated before, that she has sort of a memory of that. And so it kind of breaks through sometimes, which again is the reason you want to get people into treatment, because it kind of breaks the pattern a little bit and they become more willing to participate because they feel so much better when they get treated, of course. And when they're in the state, they develop the anosognosia. So anosognosia is a term originally coined by a famous neurologist named Babinski. He's coined the famous Babinski sign, which anyone who does any clinical work will know that sign. But he also coined the term anosognosia. And it was specifically in his day, which was at the Charcot Institute in France, was to talk about a syndrome associated with a right middle cerebral artery stroke, a large stroke, which reflects motor activity on the left side of the body. And associated with the big stroke on the right side of the brain is something called left-sided neglect, where literally the left side of the body and the left side of the world, the left side of clocks, the left side of everything ceases to exist. So you can take that patient with the stroke, show them their hand, flaccid paralysis, and they'll go, oh, yeah, wow, look at that. And then flop it down, and they'll have no understanding of that having been connected to them.
Wow.
And that happens in mental illness, schizophrenia, and addiction, which people leave out. So it's schizophrenia, any psychotic illness and addiction, you get some form of anosognosia. The common, a light version of it is denial. Denial is the sort of common term for it.
That's exactly what I was going to say. And we have a public policy that somehow does not recognize that.
Correct.
But actually kind of embraces the disconnect. Is that a fair way to put it?
Mark, you're waking up to this. You're waking up to it. It privileges it privileges these horrible symptoms of deadly serious mental illness, unless it's dementia. When anosognosia occurs in dementia, you're required to treat. But if other conditions create the anosognosia, you daren't. How dare you interfere with that?
So when you say waking up to it, for those who don't know, Drew and I have had for years kind of this give and take about the idea of criminalizing or using the criminal justice system for addiction. And I'm starting to come around to Drew's point of view here.
Well, let me put my point of view out, because you're actually coming to a more radical place than me by quite a margin. My position has been, there are ways to motivate people into care if you let us do it. There's something called motivational interviewing and motivational enhancement, and there's you have to ask something of the patient. You have to go. You can't stay here. You have to go there. I don't mean hospital or jail. I mean just off the sidewalk. You have to do something. And, oh, that's a struggle for you? Well, let me help you. Let's look at why that's a struggle for you. Boom, you're in. But you're not allowed to do that. And so that's one thing. I've not said criminalize. I am not in favor of criminalizing. I'm in favor of allowing us to motivate them into treatment and not endorsing and supporting behavior that causes them to continue to deteriorate and die. So the other thing I've said one other thing, and that is that when people do get into the criminal justice system because of addiction, it helps me. I can use that. That's all I have said. If somebody ends up there, good, because that can really help me get them into treatment.
So I've talked about, and you're sitting there in the city with a Mayor Adams kind of initiative, for lack of a better term, with people who are in distress, who are on the streets. And he will send a task force, basically, that's comprised of police, hospital, social worker, the four categories. Does that make sense? Is that at least a step in the right direction?
New York has always done a much better job with the population. They have the advantage of weather. So they can say, come with us, and they'll come because you're freezing to death, and we have a place for you. And so that's that. But it's just the model of, hey, come with us. let us help you. That's all it needs. You can't stay on the sidewalk. Come with us. We will help you. We're not going to put you in jail. We're going to do it. We won't even force you to take medication. Now, the one thing that bothers me about all these teams, it never includes physicians, or almost never. And these are all medical problems. They're not social work problems. They're not societal problems. They're not psychological problems. These are brain diseases that need medical management. And we literally have open air asylums without doctors or nurses within that facility, 6 people die a day in the LA County area. Come back to mine, which is why I am so resistant to a criminal justice kind of solution, because you get these guys who have been kids 20 something who go through the academy. They've got whatever number of weeks of training, and then you're having them deal with no. They're not ready for that. They're never. That's not their. That should. This isn't their business. They don't want it to be their business. But you need to do something else. We need to do something else. God, I was just thinking about something you said that triggered me. Damn it, aging brain.
I know we share that. So but if you don't have a model where the cops are the front line for mental health, and I've repeated it a million times, the last 4 sheriffs have all said that they run the largest mental institution in the world, which AKA the LA County Jail.
They do.
What is the solution?
Well, you know where this came from, right? Do you know the history of this?
No, tell me.
There's a book called American Psychosis that chronicles it. Essentially, there were three directors of the founder of the National Institute of Mental Health, and the two subsequent directors were psychoanalyst psychiatrists who had never set foot and never taken care of seriously mentally ill. They were busy with their high-profile analytic patients, analysis patients. And one of them had set foot once in a state mental hospital. None of the other ones had, and they believed that institutionalization caused mental illness. So they persuaded a bright young senator who eventually became president, who had a very significant soft spot for this because his sister had gone through a frontal lobotomy, which was a catastrophe. And Rose Kennedy is on the record having said, as bad as the assassinations were, nothing was as bad as what happened to Rosemary. And I would agree. And by the way, when I started working at the psychiatric hospital, there were lots of those people that I ended up taking care of. They were standard of care. Whenever a doctor says it's standard of care, the hair should stand up in the back of your neck.
Well, my father-in-law used to regale me with stories about forced sterilization here in LA. Standard
of care. So again, whenever people go, it's the standard of care. No, I'm sorry. That's a problem. Anyway, so
So they have taken this institutionalization and kind of reacted against it, or I think this is going to take us right into the new law that we talked about last week, right?
Yes, and so so what they did is they persuaded John Kennedy to support a bill, and his last signature before he went to Dallas was on the Community Mental Health Act, which put the state mental hospital, which had taken 150 years to develop, on the road to categorical extinction. And it was rather going to support community mental health centers, which were designed to prevent mental health crises, prevent mental illness, which we do not know how to do to this day. And they were abject failures. In the meantime, the state hospital contents were belched out onto the streets, the nursing homes, and the prisons, with no provisions for what to do with these people that needed custodial care. And we have remained in that state ever since.
And so when we always talk about Reagan, it actually predates
Reagan. What Reagan finally did was close the community mental health centers, which were abject failures. He had nothing to do with the closures of the state hospitals.
Yeah, and it's interesting too, because could you make a argument that because the correctional officers unions are more, I always like to take it to political and borderline conspiracy theories, but since the correctional officers union is so politically potent and the kind of prison industrial complex is so strong that's where we put our resources as opposed to state hospitals or things like that. Because one of the things you and I have talked about this revolving door, where I've got one client right now who, when he's at the state hospital, he's fine. But then when they bring him to county jail, he decompensates and goes into this incompetent where you can't deal with him. Then they send him back to the state hospital, and we've got this endless circle. Yeah. And if we had more state hospitals that were, isn't that a more humane way to handle it?
Oh my God. You remember at Los Encinas, we had a whole chronic unit for people that had, and whenever they would try to go out in the world, they would unravel. And there are people that have brain diseases that require custodial care, and they thrive under good custodial care. They can go out, they can have they can do all kinds of things, but they need the constant supervision of nurses, particularly, and doctors secondarily. And that is just a reality. I mean, think about dementia. It's the same kind of phenomenon, except dementia is inexorable. The psychiatric conditions are quite treatable, and the earlier you treat them, the better they do. You let it rip, and they're lost forever, which thus the streets of Los Angeles.
So does that, or will that I guess part of the demise, if you will, of Los Encinas, which is a facility here that we're both familiar with, because I used to put a lot of clients in there, and you were basically the director at one point.
I was the medical director of the chemical dependency stuff, so I was there all the time. Yeah, and then I directed their medical services for a while too.
Right, and that's they've kind of evaporated in a certain sense.
I don't know what's going on over there now, but I do know that the only patients you're allowed to treat are so low functioning that it's a different kind of thing. It's almost like a state hospital. I don't know that Las Vegas is that way now. I have not had any contact with them lately, but I know that the hospital treatment of patients has changed dramatically. But you mentioned because there are no state hospitals, but the laws have followed along with that. You were philosophically aligned with that.
Totally. I was there. I was one of those guys.
But to prevent us from doing our job, and you get what you get when you deny the reality of brain diseases.
Yeah, and it's because it's a shift in the way you view it. I mean, it's a shift. There is a certain and I mea culpa as one who believed that there is a certain belief, and in fact, I would argue that it's kind of the mainstream that somehow you're inhibiting free will, or I mean, we could even get into a Lockean discussion of whether or not it's a philosophical issue.
That's correct, and you have to see brain diseases close up in all the different manifestations to understand that what has captured free will is not people trying to treat someone, but the illness. The illness captures it and distorts. And these illnesses, the serious mental illnesses, schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, addiction, take advantage of every strength and weakness of the individual and uses it to maintain itself. Why we call that kind of thing? That's the nature of the illness. I don't know why.
And that's to tie this up and I guess wrap it up until we bring you back again. So that brings me to when I see this incredible frustration and acting out.
That is psychosis. You're seeing psychosis. So it looks frustration. Looks like frustration to you because they're bursting out of their seams. It really isn't frustration. It's either irritability or agitation or both. And then agitation and irritability are features of psychosis. And they just are just coming out of their skin and they can't sit still. And they're overwhelmed with, the state they're in. And it can take different manifestations. And when it goes paranoid, watch out because they think that people are trying to hurt them and they do what they have to do to protect themselves in that agitated state. Or to bring it all the way back to where we started, they'll believe that Beelzebub is coming for their kids and going to torture them. So it's better if I kill them and hide them in the ground from Beelzebub so he doesn't get a chance to get to them and torture them for the rest of their lives.
Wow. That does bring it all together. How do you, when somebody's in that state, what's your best practice?
It is medication only. It's reinforce, calm down. It's a show of force. So giving them just 4 walls is very helpful. Being in a contained environment with at least 4 people that can sort of calmly sit with them. Don't confront anything they're saying. They are not well. Their brains are misfiring. When people are in these states, the patient and the people around them, I always encourage them to think of it as a seizure. Your brain is seizing. And so whatever comes out, it's a seizure. Why would you, if somebody were shaking on the ground and yelling things out, would you start to engage with the yelling? It's the same thing. And interestingly, with many of these medication, with one of these illnesses, get what kind of, excuse me, I'm having a good day with my brain. So guess what kinds of medication we use for many of these illnesses? Anti-epileptic medication. And they work beautifully.
Wow. Drew, thank you so much. We're going to have you back immediately. I could just spend hours on this, and I appreciate it. Thank you so much. Thanks, Susan, as well.
A pleasure.
Okay. Thank you, Gary.
Thanks, guys. We'll see you next time.
All right.
Bye.
Thanks for listening to Reasonable Doubt. Subscribe on YouTube at youtube.com/Reasonable Doubt Podcast.